How would you go about finding your place at a startup like you had done years ago, but in the current decentralized remote work environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a lot harder now because in the Bay Area, the magic of the Bay Area has been serendipity.
I'm joined by Ahmed Siddiqui, author, product leader, and chief payments officer at Branch, a fintech that offers instant payments for workforces. Branch recently closed on a $75 million Series C, holds a number of leading client logos in its portfolio, like Uber Freight. Full disclaimer, I actually work for Branch myself, and yes, we do have the same first name. Having said that, I'll try my best to avoid any favoritism or bias here. Ahmed, sometimes your destiny works in weird ways. You end up doing things that you had otherwise never imagined. I never thought I'd be interviewing an older version of myself. Without further ado, though, I've got 5 pressing questions for you. Are you up for them?
I'm totally down, man. Yeah, and definitely I've come from the future to talk to you again, Ahmed.
Sweet. Going back a few years, you're about to leave the Bay Area to be closer with family in Minnesota. Your bags are packed, you've booked the movers, your wife has already resigned, and then out of the blue, just as you're on your way out, an old friend messages you to meet up for lunch. He proposes that you join his company Marqeta and instead head to Dubai to help sell a payments platform to malls. With little hesitation, you went all in, and to this day, that decision is paying you dividends. The stature you now have in this payments world might not have materialized if it hadn't been for that last minute, seemingly irrational commitment to Marqeta. So this was your foray into the industry. Why'd you do it?
Yeah, so I think a lot of where I am today is based on that one phone call. And I've always been a big believer in taking advantage of opportunities such as this because you don't know where it's going to end up. But what was really easy for me, well, number one, I've always wanted to work in the Middle East, and this was just something that came out of the blue that I wasn't expecting, and I got that opportunity. Number two, it was for a high school friend of mine that I'd be working with who I've got a ton of respect for. He's a good friend of mine, and I was like, it would be awesome to be able to work with him. And number three, I've got an incredibly supportive wife who was so open and willing to actually try doing this, especially considering that we were actually thinking about moving back to Minneapolis to be closer to the family. But we decided to go completely across the ocean to Dubai to give this a shot. So, there's 3 ways of doing it. And just generally speaking too, if you're into startups and tech, a lot of these things happen, for a reason. And, it was a big risk, but I'm so glad that I was able to take part in it.
Cool. Yeah, and as they say, happy wife, happy life. If you have her blessing, it'll all work out. So your past revolved a lot around networking, moving your place of residence, visiting WeWork offices, meeting strangers for lunch, etc. You lived in the Bay Area, far from family, just for those opportunities. As you've described, the area was unique in how easy it was to get FaceTime with founders, and it was saturated with the most exciting and groundbreaking startups. Do you think those methods of networking and connection are still relevant? Silicon Valley is not what it once was. Today, I think you'd be hard-pressed to see anybody moving out there, or anywhere for that matter, just to network. It's a different world. How would you go about finding your place at a startup like you had done years ago, but in the current decentralized remote work environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a lot harder now because in the Bay Area, the magic of the Bay Area has been serendipity. And so just being able to randomly run into somebody at a coffee shop or at a WeWork space or whatever was really the magic of it. But now, ever since the pandemic, everything is either hybrid or fully remote. And so your opportunities for serendipity go away significantly. And so in one way, it's easier for you to find work because you can be anywhere. You can be in North Dakota, you can be in Virginia, whatever, and find work, but you won't be able to get the serendipity. And so in many ways, is the charm of the Bay Area gone? A little bit, but I do find myself traveling to the Bay Area almost on a monthly basis still because a lot of my partners and customers are still there. Their headquarters there. It's still the place to be for tech, even though you may not be going into the office every day, right?
Being an experienced product leader that has now worked for a handful of startups, I think you'd have an interesting perspective on this. As a startup matures, its understanding of market fit improves. It recognizes layers to the problem that's being solved, and naturally, the product evolves. Once you've found your place, you could be building something vastly different from what you had initially envisioned. This is something that relates well to Branch, which went from a scheduling software to fintech. How do you know what direction to take a product, the adjustments you should make and those you should forego?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to follow your customers, but also at the same time, as you're initially starting off, when you don't have customers, you do need to make a little bit of a bet, right? So you design a product that you think is going to be good, and then you very quickly will find out once customers start using it, the complaints that you get from the customers are actually the best bits of feedback, right? And I mean, with Marqeta, it was very similar, in that we did a number of pivots early on. And with Branch, we did a significant number of pivots, but there was always this sort of underlying goal that we had of being able to help hourly workers or just working Americans make more money with their current jobs. And that's what we were doing with the scheduling product. It's just that when we found out we were helping them make more money, they just needed the money faster. And that's actually what helped us pivot into payments and fintech. And so being able to really listen to what they need, it might not be, hey, I want your product to work this way, but my underlying issue is actually cash flow problems. And being able to pivot your business that way is really, really important. And also at the same time, when you're looking at different startups, if they're early stage, if they're willing to pivot like that, like how we did in the early days, that's a really good sign. It's a really good sign that it's a market first company. And those are the best companies that end up surviving because you're always trying to solve the real problem of the customer.
You've published The Anatomy of the Swipe, Making Money Move, a great read that walks through modern innovations allowed by card-based systems and dissects the inner workings of the payments ecosystem. What compelled you to go through the grueling process of writing, illustrating, and publishing a 242-page book? Because with authoring, it's understood that the ROI isn't really there, at least not financially. So where did the idea come from, and what motivated you to follow through?
Look, you don't ever write a book to make money, and that's something that was never really in my mind. I think I got a unique opportunity to write this book through a program, and it was the subject area was really interesting to me because, as you had mentioned, Branch, we started off as a scheduling software, and then we became a payments and fintech company, right? And the early employees that were here, the engineers, the sales reps, etc., actually didn't have any sort of background in payments and fintech. So I was writing a lot, just generally. Like I had a bunch of Confluence posts, wiki posts, etc., that I was disseminating to the team, having lunch and learns, etc. And I was like, I've got a lot of content here. What if I put it into a book? But I mean, writing a book isn't as easy as just, taking bits and pieces and just throwing it in a book and publishing it. Like you actually need to take a look at that, really distill it down another layer so that more people can understand it, and then stitch it together like a story. And that's the real work that I had to do as part of that publishing process. But it was incredibly rewarding to do because again, it was a piece that I could hand to any net new employee at Branch, and they could help, it would help them understand payments in a, very easy to digest. I mean, 242 sounds like a lot, but it goes really fast.
Branch has no shortage of competition, and despite all odds, it's seen exponential growth since its inception. We could say the same for your last company, Marqeta, which you joined as a 35-person startup and is now publicly traded, worth around $5.5 billion, has a headcount of 850. What do you think has allowed for these companies to not only survive, but thrive in such competitive environments? 90% of startups fail. What are the qualities that put a company in that 10%? Because clearly you've got an eye for them.
Yeah, again, very, very, very few startups survive. Well, number one, I mean, look, I had opportunities where I had to take risks. I mean, joining any type of startup, there's always some risks that you need to take. to do that. But also, the other piece is, again, with both companies, we were able to pivot very quickly based on, again, listening to the customer and whatnot. And I think, those companies that are able to do that in the beginning and then eventually mature, actually have a really good chance of surviving and thriving. The other piece of it also has to do a lot with the founder and the leadership team that's there. Both Jason Gardner at Marqeta and also Atif Siddiqui at Branch, they're total visionaries, right? And they have a very keen eye for building really great products for people. And so I think from that perspective, it is really important to look for great founders and look for great founding teams that you could work with. And I think that's actually what drove me to join both of the companies.
Ahmed, thanks again for your time. To end this off, anything you'd like to share?
Thanks again, Ahmed. I just really enjoyed being part of this. And yeah, for anybody else that's watching, if you are interested in payments, you can always pick up the book, which is The Anatomy of the Swipe on Amazon. And also you can find me on Twitter, which is Siddiqui Ahmed, Siddiqui Ahmed, Ahmed. And would love to continue chatting with those folks in your audience.
Thanks, Ahmed. I'll catch you around.
Thanks again, man. Have a good one.
You too.